"You're not welcome in his future." Those were the exact words my son's girlfriend whispered to me at his graduation. In that moment, I felt the weight of every sacrifice vanish, like I'd been erased from his life with a single sentence. The day of my son's graduation should have been the proudest moment of my life. For 22 years, I had dreamed of this, sitting in a crowded auditorium, watching my boy stride across the stage in his cap and gown, his name called out for all the world to hear. I thought that moment would erase every sleepless night, every second job, every tear I cried when no one was looking. I thought it would finally be the day I could breathe and say to myself, "You did it. You raised him. He made it." The morning began with me standing in front of the mirror, smoothing out the wrinkles on my navy blue dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was the one my son once told me made me look classy, like the ladies in old movies. His words, said years ago, replayed in my head as I pinned my hair back and slipped on the necklace he had given me for Mother's Day when he was 12. A plastic chain with a crooked heart pendant that read #1 Mom. I had never stopped wearing it on important days. By the time I arrived at the university, families were pouring in, buzzing with laughter and excitement. Fathers held up phones, mothers clutched bouquets, and everywhere I looked, I saw joy. My heart swelled with pride as I spotted my son standing with his classmates. His gown hung a little loose on his tall frame, but his smile, oh, that smile, made him look like the boy I had raised and the man I always knew he'd become. I was about to call out his name when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting maybe a cousin or neighbor, but instead it was her, his girlfriend. She was dressed in a fitted white dress, the kind you'd see in glossy magazines, her hair sleek and perfect. She was beautiful, no denying that. But there was something about the way she looked at me that always made my stomach knot. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her lips curving into what looked like a smile, though her eyes stayed cold. I nodded politely. "Hi, sweetheart. You must be so proud of him, too." She leaned in, her perfume sharp and suffocating, and whispered so only I could hear, "You're not welcome in his future." The word slammed into me like a brick to the chest. For a second, I thought I had misheard. "Excuse me?" I whispered back, blinking in disbelief. Her smile widened, her voice barely above a breath. "You heard me. You've done your job raising him, but from now on he's mine. So do us both a favor. Don't cling. He doesn't need you anymore." I froze, clutching my small gift bag, a leather-bound journal I had saved up for, embossed with my son's initials. My throat burned, but no words came. I had endured insults in life, plenty of them, but nothing compared to hearing this on the very day I should have been celebrated as much as he was. Before I could respond, she straightened her posture, smoothed her dress, and gave a little wave across the room as if nothing had happened. My son spotted her, grinned, and motioned her over. She walked toward him with ease, leaving me standing alone, her words echoing in my head. "You're not welcome in his future." The ceremony itself blurred past me. I clapped when everyone else clapped, stood when everyone else stood, but inside I felt hollow. When his name was called and he crossed the stage, my tears weren't just from pride. They were from grief. Grief for the invisible line that had just been drawn between us. Afterward, families crowded the courtyard with balloons and cameras. I waited for my turn to hug him, but every time I stepped forward, she was there first, guiding him toward her friends, her parents, her circle. At one point, she slipped her arm through his and whispered something in his ear. He laughed, glanced at me, and gave a small wave as if I were just another guest. I smiled back, forcing it, clutching the journal so tightly my knuckles ached. I wanted to run to him, to shout that I had sacrificed everything to see him standing here, that no one would ever love him like I did. But her voice haunted me. "You're not welcome in his future." So I stayed quiet. I stayed small. I stayed out of the way. That night, alone in my car, I placed the untouched journal back into its box. I didn't give it to him. Instead, I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel until my hands went numb. The graduation that should have been my victory lap had become the day I realized I might already be losing him, and as the streetlights flickered across my windshield, I whispered to myself words I never thought I'd say. Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong in his future at all. People see the cap and gown, the smiling graduate, the proud mother snapping photos, and they think it's simple. They don't see the years it took to get there, the nights I stayed awake with worry gnawing at my chest, the mornings I dragged myself out of bed long before the sun rose, praying the car would start so I could get to work on time. I became a single mother when my son was just 6. His father left one rainy Thursday night, muttering about needing freedom and a fresh start. He packed a single bag, kissed our boy on the forehead, and drove away without so much as a backward glance. I stood in the doorway with my son clinging to my waist, his little body shaking as he asked, "When's Daddy coming back?" I couldn't answer him because the truth was, I didn't know. All I could do was kneel down, wipe his tears, and say, "It's okay, baby. You still have me." From that day forward, everything changed. I was no longer just his mother. I was his provider, his protector, his cheerleader, his disciplinarian. I worked double shifts at the diner downtown, pouring coffee for truck drivers at 5 a.m. and wiping down counters well past midnight. On weekends, I cleaned offices just to make sure the bills were paid and the fridge stayed full. My hands ached, my back screamed, but I never let him see how tired I was. There were times when money got so tight I skipped meals, telling him I'd already eaten at work. He was a smart boy, though. He'd eye me suspiciously as I slid the last piece of chicken onto his plate, but he never argued. He'd just quietly say, "Thanks, Mom," and eat every bite. Those were the nights I cried in the bathroom, covering my mouth so he wouldn't hear. But there were bright moments, too. He was such a good kid, earnest, kind, and determined. He brought home gold stars from school like they were treasures, sticking them on the fridge with pride. Every crooked art project, every misspelled "I love you, Mom" card, I saved them all in a box under my bed. Those little scraps of paper carried me through the hardest days. When he reached high school, things didn't get easier. The world expected him to have the kind of support I couldn't always give. SAT prep courses, tutors, sports gear we couldn't afford. He wanted to join the basketball team, but the fee for uniforms was more than half a month's rent. I was ready to tell him no, but then he came home one day, breathless, saying, "Mom, Coach says I've got real potential." "Please, I'll work after school to help pay." I didn't let him. Instead, I picked up another shift, working late nights at a grocery store stocking shelves. I remember dragging myself home one morning, my arms sore from lifting boxes, only to find him already awake, practicing dribbling in the driveway with an old ball a neighbor had given us. When he saw me, his face lit up. "I'm gonna make you proud, Mom." And he did, over and over again. By the time he got accepted into college, I thought my heart might burst. The acceptance letter came in a thin white envelope, and I was terrified it was a rejection. He tore it open at the kitchen table, scanned the words, and then shouted so loud the neighbors probably heard, "I got in!" He grabbed me, twirling me around that tiny kitchen until we were both laughing and crying. He looked at me with those same big brown eyes he'd had since he was a boy and said, "You did this, Mom. You gave me this chance." That was why graduation mattered so much. It wasn't just his achievement, it was ours. Proof that every sacrifice had meant something. Proof that I hadn't failed him, even when I felt like I was barely holding it all together. And yet, as I stood there that day, hearing his girlfriend tell me I didn't belong in his future, all those sacrifices suddenly felt invisible. The nights I went hungry, the shifts I worked until my feet blistered, the dreams I gave up, none of it seemed to matter. She saw me as disposable, like an old coat you hang in the back of a closet and forget. But I wasn't disposable. I was the reason he had gotten to that stage at all. Still, I stayed silent. I smiled when people looked my way, and when they asked, "Aren't you proud?" I answered with a tight nod and swallowed the lump in my throat. Because the truth was, in that moment, I wasn't sure pride was enough to keep me from being erased. The first time my son brought her home, I wanted to like her. I really did. After everything he had been through, after all the years of sacrifice, I just wanted him to be happy. He walked in with his arm around her shoulders, grinning ear to ear, and introduced her with a pride I hadn't seen in him before. "Mom, this is Emily." She was beautiful. The kind of beauty that turned heads when she walked into a room. Long, dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and a confidence that filled the space around her. She extended her hand, perfectly manicured, and said all the right things. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Carter. I've heard so much about you." For a while, I convinced myself she was perfect for him. She was ambitious, studying business, always talking about her future plans and the kind of life she wanted. My son was captivated. He hung on her every word, and the way he looked at her, it was the look of a young man in love. But the cracks showed sooner than I expected. That first dinner, I made his favorite, chicken pot pie, the recipe passed down from my mother. It was tradition in our home, the dish he always asked for on birthdays or after a tough exam. When I set the steaming dish on the table, my son's face lit up, but Emily's nose wrinkled just slightly before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, that's nice," she said, picking at the crust with her fork, "but Daniel's really into clean eating now. No heavy carbs." She laughed lightly, as if it were a harmless joke, but I saw the way my son shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He still ate 2 helpings that night, but I noticed the flicker of guilt in his eyes, like he was torn between us. From then on, little things piled up. She never asked me about my life, my work, or even about Daniel's childhood. When I'd try to share a story, like the time he dressed up as a cowboy for Halloween and refused to take off the boots for 3 weeks, she would smile politely, then pivot the conversation back to herself, her internships, her professors, her friends in the city. It stung, but I told myself she was just young. Maybe she didn't know how to connect with me yet. But then came his birthday. I stayed up late the night before baking his favorite cake, chocolate with peanut butter frosting. It was a tradition we'd shared since he was 10. When I brought it out, candles flickering, Emily clapped her hands and said, "Oh, how quaint." She leaned over to blow out the candles before he even could, then whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Daniel doesn't eat that anymore. Too much sugar. I'll make sure he stays on track." She picked up the knife from my hand and set the cake aside, untouched. My son laughed it off, kissed my cheek, and muttered, "Thanks, Mom. You didn't have to." But I saw the guilt flash in his eyes again. Moments like that became common. She dismissed me in small, cutting ways, never outright cruel when others were watching, but sharp enough to leave me stung. At one Christmas dinner, I set the table with the mismatched china I had collected over the years. Each piece carried a memory: yard sales, thrift shops, gifts from neighbors. She picked up a plate, studied the faded floral pattern, and said with a laugh, "Vintage is charming, but don't you think it's time to upgrade? Daniel deserves something a little classier." No one else seemed to notice the weight of her words, but I felt it. I felt every dismissal like a stone in my chest. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself she loved him. That was what mattered. I didn't want to be the bitter mother who couldn't let go. But deep down, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the way she dismissed me. It was the way she looked at him sometimes. Not like a man she loved, but like a prize she had won. When he talked about wanting to help people, about maybe working cases that didn't pay much but mattered, her smile would tighten. "That's nice," she'd say, "but let's be realistic. You've worked too hard not to make real money." Her words weren't just dismissive. They were telling. I brushed it off for years, convincing myself it was just growing pains in their relationship. But looking back now, I realized those small cracks were the truth showing through. And the night of his graduation, when she leaned in and told me I wasn't welcome in his future, I finally saw her for who she had been all along. If graduation day was the beginning of my erasure, the weeks that followed sealed it. There should have been joy, celebrations, and long talks about his future. My son had crossed a milestone few from our neighborhood ever reached. I expected family dinners, maybe even a small party with relatives and neighbors who had cheered him on since he was a boy dribbling a cracked basketball in our driveway. But instead, every celebration seemed to pass me by. Emily took charge of everything, as if she were the one who had raised him, as if she were the one who had worked those double shifts to keep the lights on. She planned a graduation dinner downtown, at a restaurant so expensive I nearly choked when I saw the menu online. I wasn't asked to help, wasn't consulted about the guest list, wasn't even asked what day worked best for me. Instead, my son called me one evening and said, "Mom, Emily reserved a place for us this weekend. She's handling all the details, so just show up, okay?" Just show up. Those words stung more than he realized. I had spent his whole life showing up, at parent-teacher conferences, at the emergency room when he broke his wrist at the school parking lot in the middle of a snowstorm when his old car wouldn't start. But now, showing up was all that was left for me to do. No input, no voice, just a guest in my own son's life. At that dinner, I sat at the far end of the table while Emily held court, introducing him to her friends, her colleagues, her world. Every time I tried to share a story from his childhood, the scraped knees, the science fair projects, she cut in with a smooth laugh and said, "Daniel doesn't talk about that much anymore. He's so focused on the future." And he just smiled, letting her steer the conversation, his eyes darting toward me now and then, with something that looked like guilt. I told myself to stay quiet, not to embarrass him, but inside my heart ached, because with every word she spoke, I felt myself fading further away. It wasn't just the dinner. There were other moments that might seem small to anyone else, but to me, they were daggers. When he got his first job offer out of college, I wanted to celebrate with him. I baked his favorite meal, lit candles, and set the table for two. But when he arrived, he brought Emily with him. She swept into my kitchen in a designer coat, glanced at the table, and said, "Oh, Daniel, we're late. Remember, we promised my parents we'd toast with them tonight." He looked torn, glanced at the meal I had made, then back at her. "Mom," he said gently, "I'll come by later this week, okay?" I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt, but after they left, I sat at that table alone, staring at the flickering candles until the wax burned down. Even holidays weren't mine anymore. Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, she orchestrated everything. Her family's house, her family's traditions, her family's rules. My son would call me after the fact, his voice apologetic but firm. "Mom, we'll see you soon, I promise." You understand, right? And I always said yes. Because what else could I say? I didn't want to be the overbearing mother who drove him away. But inside, the silence grew louder. The silence of not being asked to help with his plans. The silence of sitting at home while he spent weekends with her family. The silence of realizing that in her picture of his future, there was no room for me. And every time I swallowed that silence, I lost a little more of myself. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that as long as he was happy, I could endure being pushed aside. But the truth was, happiness built on exclusion never lasts. And deep down, I knew something darker was coming, because when someone works that hard to erase you, it's rarely out of love. It's out of fear. Fear that the truth will come to light. And the truth about Emily was about to surface in a way none of us could have imagined. It happened weeks after graduation, on a humid summer evening when the air clung heavy like a wet blanket. I had just finished another long day at the diner when my phone buzzed. It was Mark, my son's best friend since grade school, the boy who used to sit at my kitchen table eating Pop-Tarts and mapping out basketball plays with Daniel on loose-leaf paper. His voice trembled when he spoke. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know if I should be the one to tell you this, But you need to know. Daniel needs to know. I felt my stomach tighten. Know what? There was a long pause before he said the words that made my knees nearly buckle. Emily's not who she says she is. He told me he had proof, photos, messages, whispers that had been circulating quietly among people who worked with her. At first I couldn't believe it. I wanted to hang up, to dismiss it as gossip. But Mark's voice was steady, filled with the kind of heartbreak only someone who truly cared could carry. I wouldn't be saying this if I wasn't sure. Later that night, he sent me screenshots. There she was, Emily, the girl who had told me I wasn't welcome in my own son's future, wrapped in the arms of another man. The pictures weren't old. They were dated barely 2 weeks after graduation. I sat at the kitchen table staring at them, my hands shaking. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was sorrow. Sorrow for my son, who had given his whole heart to a woman who treated it like a toy. But the pictures were just the beginning. Whispers trickled in from other corners, friends of friends, colleagues of Emily's, even one of her classmates who reached out privately. They all said the same thing. Emily's relationship with Daniel wasn't about love. It was about opportunity. She had bragged openly about his potential, his career, his ambition, his bright future. She told people he was her ticket out of the financial mess her own family had sunk into. And suddenly, all the little moments clicked into place. The way she pushed him toward higher-paying jobs, the way she dismissed his dream of working pro bono cases, the way she introduced him at gatherings, not as my boyfriend Daniel, but as Daniel, the soon-to-be lawyer. To her, he wasn't a man. He was a ladder. The betrayal cut me deeper than I expected, because it wasn't just about her using him. It was about her trying to erase me, the one person who had fought tooth and nail to get him to this point. She didn't just want his future. She wanted to rewrite his past, to make me disappear so she could build her perfect story with him as the centerpiece. For days, I kept the truth to myself, unsure if I should be the one to break his heart. Every time I heard his voice over the phone, bright, hopeful, telling me about his new job, I wanted to scream, "She doesn't love you. She's lying to you." But I didn't. I stayed silent because a mother's instinct is to protect, even when the truth feels like a blade. It wasn't me who finally told him. It was Mark. He couldn't stand watching his best friend walk into a trap. He showed Daniel the photos one afternoon, minutes before an engagement party Emily's parents were hosting. Daniel called me that night, his voice fractured, raw. "Mom, it's true. Everything. She lied. She's been lying this whole time." My heart broke hearing him sob through the phone, the same way it had broken years ago when he was 6, clutching his toy dinosaur and asking why his father had left. But beneath the heartbreak, another feeling stirred. Vindication. All those times Emily had dismissed me, undermined me, told me I wasn't part of his future. Suddenly the mask had slipped, and the truth was out. She wasn't protecting him from me. She was protecting herself from being exposed, and now she was. The confrontation came like a storm nobody could stop. Daniel called me the morning after he saw the photos. His voice was tight, sharp, with a kind of fury I had never heard from him before. "Mom, I'm going to see her today. I need to hear it from her mouth. I can't." He broke off, his breath catching. "I just can't believe it's real unless I see her face when I ask." I wanted to tell him not to go. I wanted to beg him to cut her out of his life immediately. But I also knew my son. He needed to see the truth for himself. Only then would he believe. So I said quietly, "Be strong, sweetheart. Don't let her twist this into something it isn't." That afternoon, he met Emily at a coffee shop downtown. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Mark insisted I come. "He's going to need you," he said, even if he doesn't realize it yet. I slipped into a corner booth, my heart pounding, hands trembling around a cup of coffee I barely touched. From where I sat, I could see everything. Emily in her polished blouse and pearls, smiling as though nothing was wrong, and my son across from her, jaw tight, fists clenched. He didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, laid it on the table, and turned the screen toward her. The pictures glared back at her, her arms around another man, lips pressed against someone who wasn't my son. For the first time since I'd known her, Emily faltered. Her smile slipped. Her hands twitched in her lap. But it lasted only a moment before she straightened, her voice smooth. "That's not what it looks like." Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. "It looks like you've been lying to me." "It was a mistake," she said quickly, her tone sharpening when she saw he wasn't buying it. "One mistake. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything." His voice rose, eyes blazing. "You've been planning my life like it's a business deal. You told my mother she's not part of my future. And all this time, you were the one cutting me out of the truth." Her eyes narrowed, and that sweet mask she always wore fell away completely. What remained was cold, calculating. "Your mother," she spat, "is the problem here. She's been poisoning you, against me from the start. She's jealous, Daniel. She doesn't want to let go. She wants to control you forever." My stomach twisted, but I stayed quiet, hidden in the corner. This was his fight now. Daniel leaned forward, his voice shaking but steady. "Don't you dare blame her. She has been the only person who's ever had my back. Always. She didn't poison me against you. You did that yourself." For a moment, Emily's composure cracked. Her cheeks flushed, her voice rising. "You're going to throw all of this away over a few pictures? Over her?" Daniel's chair screeched against the floor as he stood. His voice was loud enough now that people turned to stare. "I'm throwing it away because I finally see you for what you are." Emily reached for his hand, desperation seeping into her voice. "Daniel, please. I love you. I made a mistake, yes, but it's you I want, not him, not anyone else." He yanked his hand back. "If that were true, you wouldn't have tried to erase my mother. You wouldn't have told her she wasn't part of my family." His voice broke then, and for the first time since he was a boy, I saw the tears brimming in his eyes. "She is my family. And you never were." The coffee shop fell silent, the only sound the hum of the espresso machine. Emily sat frozen, her mouth open, her mask shattered. Daniel turned and walked out, his shoulders stiff, his face pale but resolute. Mark followed close behind him. I slipped out after them, my chest aching with both sorrow and pride. Outside on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun caught my son's face. He looked at me, broken but unburdened, and whispered, "Mom, you were right." About everything, I pulled him into my arms, holding him like I had when he was small, whispering against his hair, "You see it now. That's all that matters." For the first time in years, he wasn't clinging to her illusion anymore. He was holding on to the truth. I thought the confrontation at the coffee shop would be the end. I thought Daniel walking away from her would close that painful chapter for good. But I underestimated Emily and her family. People like her don't just lose. They rewrite the story so they can still win. The very next day, my phone began buzzing nonstop. At first, I assumed it was friends and relatives checking in, but when I opened my messages, my stomach dropped. Screenshots, links, social media posts. There was Emily, her face pale, mascara streaking down her cheeks in a carefully staged photo. The caption read, "Some people just can't let go. Some mothers don't know when to stop." And beneath it, hundreds of comments flooded in. That poor girl, imagine having a boyfriend whose mom tries to ruin everything. Classic overbearing mother-in-law, I've seen it before, he should cut her off for good. It was like watching my name dragged through mud in real time. The rumors spread quickly. Emily's family told anyone who would listen that I had manipulated Daniel into leaving her, that I had planted fake photos, that I had poisoned his mind because I was jealous of losing him. Her mother even told people at their church that I was obsessed with my son and couldn't handle him moving on. By the end of the week, neighbors were whispering when I walked down the street. Old friends called me, hesitant, asking, "Margaret, did you really tell Daniel not to marry her? Did you really force him to break up?" It didn't matter that Daniel himself had seen the proof with his own eyes. It didn't matter that Emily had been caught red-handed. The lies were louder than the truth. And then, as if the smear campaign weren't enough, a letter arrived in the mail, a legal letter. Emily's family was threatening to sue me for defamation, for interference with contractual relations, even for emotional damages. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. Interference with contractual relations? What did that even mean? To them, marriage wasn't love. It was a contract, a transaction, and I had ruined it by existing. I brought the letter to my friend Linda, who worked at a law office downtown. She skimmed it and shook her head. "This is intimidation, Margaret. Empty threats. They're trying to scare you, but why?" I whispered. "Why come after me?" Her eyes softened. "Because you're the one person they couldn't erase. And because their whole plan depended on Daniel marrying Emily." That was when I learned the full truth. Emily's family was drowning in debt. Her father's businesses had failed, one after another. The marriage wasn't just about love, it was about rescuing them financially. That prenup Emily insisted on, it wasn't to protect Daniel. It was to funnel his future income directly into their pockets. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her desperation, her obsession with controlling me, her determination to make sure I had no place in Daniel's future. Because if I was there, if I had a voice, Daniel might see the truth too soon. And now that he had, they were desperate to bury me under lies. The following week was hell. Anonymous messages filled my inbox. "Monster. Jealous old hag. You ruined your son's life." Emily's friends posted cryptic statuses about toxic mothers and family destroyers. Strangers I had never met sent me threats, telling me I deserved to be alone. Through it all, Daniel tried to protect me. He came by one night, his face pale, holding another letter. "They're threatening me too, Mom. Emily's father says if I don't publicly clear her name, he'll drag you into court. He'll ruin you financially." My heart twisted. He was only just starting his career, already carrying student loans on his back, and now they wanted to bleed him dry before he even got a chance. I reached across the table and took his hand. "They can't ruin us, sweetheart. Not if we stand together." But as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, I realized something. Silence would no longer protect us. Emily had used perception as her weapon, crying pretty tears for the cameras, spinning lies that people wanted to believe. If perception was her weapon, then truth would have to be mine, and I had more truth on my side than she could ever bury. The weeks that followed felt like a battle I hadn't chosen, but one I couldn't walk away from. Emily and her family thought they could drown me in lies, but they underestimated me. They mistook my silence for weakness, when in reality, it was patience. With Linda's help, I started collecting everything. Copies of the prenup her father had drafted, screenshots of Emily's messages bragging about Daniel's potential, and even financial records that painted a damning picture of the Hayes family's true situation. It wasn't just a broken engagement anymore. It was fraud disguised as love. I didn't know how to fight her carefully staged crocodile tears on social media, but I knew one thing. Evidence speaks louder than mascara-streaked selfies. Linda connected me with a journalist who specialized in financial scandals. Within a week, the article went live. Behind the broken engagement, Hayes family's financial schemes exposed. It was brutal. It detailed the bankruptcies, the predatory prenup clauses, and even hinted at Emily's affair. For the first time, people stopped seeing me as the bitter, jealous mother-in-law. They saw me as what I truly was, a woman who had raised her son through sacrifice, only to watch someone try to erase her for profit. The tide shifted overnight. The same neighbors who had whispered behind my back now knocked on my door with casseroles and apologies. Friends who had doubted me called to say, "We're sorry, Margaret." We should have known better, but what mattered most wasn't the public's opinion. It was Daniel's. One evening, as the cicadas buzzed outside and the summer heat settled heavy over the porch, he sat beside me, his shoulders finally relaxed for the first time in weeks. He reached over, squeezed my hand, and said softly, "Mom, you saved me." I should have listened to you from the start. I looked at him. This man I had raised, the boy who once clung to me in the doorway when his father left, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "No," I whispered. "You saved yourself. You saw the truth when it mattered most. That's what counts." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "You were always my family. Always." I don't know how I let her make me forget that, even for a moment. I pulled him into my arms, holding him like I had when he was little. In that moment, I realized something powerful. Emily had never really erased me. She had only managed to distract him, but love built on lies crumbles, while love built on truth, like ours, endures. Emily tried to fight back, of course. She posted more photos, spun more stories, even threatened more lawsuits. But the evidence was undeniable. Her mask had cracked, and no amount of tears could glue it back together. Eventually, the noise faded. Her family retreated, their schemes exposed, their reputations in tatters, and for the first time in months, there was peace. Daniel threw himself into his new job, working long hours, building the career he had dreamed of. Not for her, not for anyone else, but for himself. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch him smiling, the same real smile he had as a boy. As for me, I learned something too. I learned that being erased is only possible if you let yourself disappear. I had thought silence would protect me, but in the end, it was my voice, the truth, that saved both of us. So when people ask me now about that summer, I don't just talk about heartbreak or betrayal. I talk about resilience, about a mother who refused to be written out of her own son's story. And when I look at Daniel, I don't see the pain of what we lost. I see the strength of what we kept. Because in the end, Emily was wrong. I am part of his future. I always was. I always will be.